Morning, everyone. Thanks for joining me. For those who do not know me yet, I am Ron Levine from Mindfulness and Blue Jeans. I fell ass backwards into mindfulness and insight meditation in 1998 during a time when I was dealing with clinical anxiety and depression and a raging panic disorder, which had blown up into agoraphobia. So I was trapped at home. I was on disability, unable to go past the front door without melting down. I happened to get paired up with a psychologist who even back then was already several decades deep into practicing and teaching mindfulness and insight meditation. And he offered me these techniques as a way of dealing with my issues. And I was not thrilled with his suggestion. My thinking was, I can't work, I can't go out, I can't be social, my life has stopped. And here's this guy saying, oh, let's look at the breathing for a while. Okay, thanks, I guess. He didn't give me anything else. I was sitting at home all day anyway. And I thought to myself, all right, I'm going to give this an honest shot just long enough so I can go back to him and say, look, dude, this didn't work. Can I have the real treatment now? That was April of 1998. Have not had that conversation with him yet. And here I am teaching the same things almost 25 years later. So maybe there's something to it. We'll find out. So this is our last meeting of the year. And I like to close out with a session on letting go. Something that seems to come up for us an awful lot, whether it's the end of the year or the beginning of the year, or any friggin' time, right? In the course of leading sessions like this, you almost invariably end up sharing some classic spiritual parables. And I'm going to start with one this morning, and this is one of my favorites. Those of you who may have joined for this session last year might remember this one. There's these two monks, a master and a student. Pretty classic way for these to start, right? It's kind of like the priest, rabbi, and lawyer go walking into a bar of jokes, right? They all start this way, don't they? So, two monks, master and a student, are out walking. And they come across this river. And there's a young woman standing by the river. And she says to them, I need to cross this river, but I cannot get my dress wet. Would one of you be able to carry me across the river? The two monks look at each other, and there's this understanding between them because they've taken a vow to never touch a female. So they look at each other for a second, and the master says, I'll carry you across. And the student is aghast. The hell? The master picks up the young lady, and the three of them cross the river. The master sets her down. She says, thank you, goes on her way. And the two monks go on their way. And for the next 20 minutes or so, the master can just feel the angst coming off of the student. Until finally he just turns to him and says, is something you'd like to share? And the student says to him, I can't believe, in light of the vow that we took, that you did what you just did. You touched that woman. And the master looks at him and says, I put her down 20 minutes ago. Why are you still carrying her? And that comes back to me again and again and again when we're talking about things like letting go. One of my very early insights in this practice was something that I call the direction of grip. I was really trapped in this cycle of thinking, fear-based rumination. All right, does this sound familiar at all? And in the course of my early practice, as I started to tease some of that apart, I realized that I tended to think of the thoughts as having a grip on me. I couldn't escape this line of thinking, this rumination. And then it started to dawn on me. I was like, well, wait a minute. Between the two of us, if you will, right? Me, this concept of me on the one hand, and this stream of thought on the other. Well, between the two of us, only one of us has volition, will, intention, right? And it's not the thoughts. So if there's a direction of grip happening here, it's not the thoughts having a grip on me, right? It's going the other way, which is good news because then maybe there's something we can do about it. An example that I give a lot about letting go is, imagine somebody hands you a hot potato. Well, we just immediately let go, right? There's no thought process there. We just let go. But when it comes to thinking, we don't do that, do we? We don't do that. Why? Well, one of the things that I talk about a lot is karma. My standard disclaimer is that when I talk about karma, I'm not talking about our Western bastardized version of karma, about justice and revenge and what goes around comes around. He's going to get his in the end and all that crap. Karma in the Buddhist sense, cause and effect, setting conditions and seeing what comes from those conditions, which then become causes for future conditions, right? I'm going to do a whole thing on karma next month. It's one of the things I like to do at the beginning of every year is a session called New Year, New Karma. So I'm not going to get all the way into it, but I do want to talk about the central pillar of karma, which is intention. Why don't we just let go of certain thoughts in the same way we can just drop a hot potato? Well, there's an intention there. We think that we're going to get something for our efforts. That's why we do anything, isn't it? It's not special to letting go or thoughts. That's our whole lives, isn't it? We put out some kind of effort, mental, physical, what have you, because we think it's going to pay off in some way. So when we frame it that way, well, what's our intention for hanging on to some line of thinking? And what I found for myself pretty invariably is that it's an attempt to change how I'm feeling, or an attempt to not feel something. All right? Let me give a really mundane, everyday kind of example, something we can probably all relate to. Okay? You ever have one of those times where you get into an argument with someone and then like 6 hours later you think of that perfect retort you didn't have at the time, right? It's because when we have some kind of an altercation with someone like that, once it's over, is it really over? Of course it's not frickin' over. We spend the next however many, sometimes not just hours, months, years, replaying, thinking about this thing. There's an intention there, okay? What we're doing is using our intellect, our thinking, what in Buddhist circles is sometimes referred to as verbal fabrication, which is a fancy way of saying we're using directed thought, the kind of thought that we think in actual logical words and sentences, as opposed to just like random images and stuff, using directed thought for a purpose. Again, intention. It's an activity that we are engaging in. And why? Well, typically in this example, to change the narrative, right? Change it to, I won the argument, or, oh, I could have won, or here's how I'm going to win next time. You know, we don't like the way it was left. We don't feel good about that. So we're going to keep replaying and trying to reframe and maybe change our memory of it, or say, well, no, maybe he thought of it this way and maybe Okay. We use this replaying, this rumination, as a way to try to avoid experiencing the felt sense of what actually happened, or what is actually happening, or what we think might happen. And the problem with that, because let's face it, if that worked, none of us would be here right now, right? We'd all be off doing something else. So obviously it doesn't work. We've all found that. And that's because these feelings happen at a pre-verbal level. These are things that happen in an energetic sense in the body, a felt sense. These are things that happen at an emotional level. Mentally at a more symbolic level, if you're very visually oriented like I am. We're trying to use, essentially, language. Something that is newer to our systems evolutionarily. Abstract thought, language, complex thinking, brain stuff, which likes to think it can control everything. Right? We're trying to use those newer systems to override the older ones. Feelings, emotions. Doesn't work. Can't work. Never works. So I'm going to say a little bit more about that in a moment. But first, I want to point out a critical insight that this led to for me in my practice and changed the way I approach the entire subject of letting things go. And that is this. Stop. Stop trying to let things go. Why? Well, we talk about intention. It's well-intentioned, but not only does it not work for the reason I just said about trying to use our intellectual intention to override a deeper felt sense, but trying to let go of something is just another form of gripping. It is saying, I need to let go. I have a requirement to let go. So now, rather than simply holding on to the thing we were already holding on to, we're now holding on to another thing saying, I need to let go of that thing. Huh? We can't use gripping to release gripping. It's a bullshit requirement, in my experience. If you find differently, I want to know about it. So, how the hell do we do this then? What are we doing? This is where another pillar of karma comes in, which is attention. We observe the chain of processes of what's arising at both a thought and a felt level. And we listen to that without an agenda. Easier said than done. This leads to insight into the process. For example, once we stop arguing with the thing, we can start to find what is the deeper meaning that I'm ascribing to this thing. Sometimes we don't even know why we're really hanging on to the thing. We might think we know. There's this old saying that what we think is bothering us isn't what's actually bothering us. I'll give you an example. Let's go back to that argument with that perfect retort we came up with 6 hours later. Is it really about the verbal exchange we had with the other person in itself? Not in my experience. Opening up to that, I start to see where that spins off into. Instead of spinning off into the narrative, the story, here's what he said, and here's what I was, and replaying the whole thing. No. Let me see what the actual felt sense around it is. What is that saying? And that's when a whole bunch of interesting things start to come up, like, well, he can't say that to me. I can't let other people see that he said that to me. Then anybody can think they can say that to me. You can't do that. I'm not a person. I can't be seen as a person who can be, who you can't treat me. No, that's not allowed. Well, guess what, sunshine? He did say that. That happened. And maybe somebody saw it. And we start to see that, well, I have some storylines around my own concept of myself, what's allowed, my own vulnerability. It's like one of those times when something happens to us where we were thinking, oh, well, that could never happen to me. We see something happen to people. Oh, well, that would never happen to me. And then it happens to us. And it's like, oh, holy shit. How'd that happen to me? Well, because it can, right? It's not pleasant, but it is in tune with reality. And if we're going to alleviate our suffering, which of course is all the Buddha taught, alleviating our suffering through things like learning how to let go, right? If we're going to do that, we damn well better start aligning ourselves with actual reality. Otherwise, we create this endless friction between what keeps us comfortable and what actually is. And how's that working out for us? Well, take a look at the world, right? We have a regular here in our group who gave a wonderful example of this a couple of sessions ago, an experience that she had during the sitting that we had that day. And I won't get into all the specifics of it, but it was around some familial conflict that was happening between her kids that was potentially going to affect family Thanksgiving gathering. And she was having some inner mental arguments about this. And during the course of the sitting we had that day, she just gave it some space and listened. And she saw where these thought patterns were coming from, the emotion, the felt sense that was driving them, and got deeper and deeper into them until she arrived at a place that day where she realized, I'm ascribing a value to this such that if A, B, and C don't happen as they should, I might be a bad mother. I can't imagine something, a more deeply felt sense than that. And are we ever going to see that, really see that, if we're busy just replaying all the happy horseshit at that intellectual level? Probably not. We're making space for a felt experience without arguing with it. And again, it's not necessarily pleasant all the time. This is why I call my practice mindfulness in blue jeans. It's a blue-collar practice. You're going to get a little dirty sometimes. Gonna happen. But we replace the cycle of avoidance and rumination with a cycle of listening and arising. Because things arise, and as we listen, deeper things will arise. And these are the things that need to express. And that leads us to a cycle of discovery, as these new things finally have a chance to express. Discovery and processing. Not the mental processing. Processing at a felt sense. This, in my experience, this is how letting go actually happens. Do we get to say exactly how or when? No. No. But in my experience, it is what works. Simple attention can be enough. There are 3 points that I'd like to offer for you to keep in mind in general on this topic. First thing is, letting go is not something we do. It's something we stop doing. We don't do letting go. We stop grasping. Second thing is, it's a trap, really, most of the time, to think of letting go as sort of this binary on-off, you flip a switch, I've now let it go. It's like, You may find that spontaneously happens sometimes in the course of practice. Fine if it does. But to have that concept of that's how it works means we're always kind of looking, okay, did the switch get flipped? How do I flip it now? What did it do? It can be enough simply to be open to the idea that the grip could ease, could loosen a little. Just a little. And we just kind of see what happens. Because let's face it, a lot of the things that we're gripping onto, again, there's an intention there. We're holding on to it for a reason. And we've been doing that for decades, right? Some of these things. So are we going to just... No, we're not going to... We feel safe at some level hanging on to these things. Especially like I was talking about before with the sense of vulnerability. That can't happen to me. We feel safe. So it's not necessarily, not even not realistic, may not even be healthy to say, okay, I got to get rid of this whole thing right now. No, you don't. No, you don't. Just check it out. What's the gripping like? What's it like? You ever really looked at it? And that leads me to the third point, which is this. Because sometimes we can really get wrapped up in, oh, should I be doing this? Should I be doing this? Should I be doing this? And we wonder, okay, well, let's make it incredibly friggin' simple. When in doubt, listen. Just listen. What should I be doing? How do I... Listen. Just shut up. Right? Listen. You don't have to do a thing. Stop doing. Stop trying to do. Listen. Okay? Let's sit with that for a bit. The one cue I always like to give before we begin is to have your hips elevated higher than your knees if possible, which is good for your posture as well as your breathing. If that's not possible right now, not a big deal. Something to keep in mind for next time, perhaps. And let's begin, as we always do, by imagining that we are suspended from the ceiling by a string attached to the top of our head. As a nice cue to sit up straight, without adding any extra tension to do so. If you are noticing any tension in your body right now, tension in the mind right now, that's fine. That's fine. That is a form of grasping, gripping, holding on, that you may be doing consciously, or perhaps your body is just doing it out of habit. We don't need to try to force that to stop, because again, that's just another kind of gripping. It's more tension. So we don't bring tension to tension and get relaxation doing. So if there is some tension, let it be tension. It's allowed to be here. I also like to take notice of what is underneath me. Chair, cushion, floor. And get a sense of grounding, of support. There is something underneath me supporting me, and it can handle that. I don't have to do anything about it. And just take a moment to notice this sense of grounding at the bottom, and an easy lift at the top, and whatever else happens to be in between for you right now. Just notice. And if you haven't already, you may begin to bring your attention to your breathing. And the breathing can be very powerful to work with in this area because we very often begin to shape our breathing, change our breathing, try to control our breathing. When we bring our attention to it in this practice, we feel like there's a meditative breath we need to achieve. It needs to be something long, deep, and contemplative, right? Not here. Not now. Your meditative breath is simply the breath that is happening as we are sitting here meditating, observing it. The topic of letting go came up spontaneously during a recent session, and one of our other regulars said sometimes it's easier for him to think of letting be rather than letting go. Can we let the breath be as it is? Maybe we can't. Maybe we've been controlling it for so long, as I once did, that we're not sure how to, or we don't want to relinquish control over the breathing. Okay. Let's let that be. Let the control be. What's it like? How does it feel? Perhaps we can notice the intention that is driving it, what it is that we think we will get by controlling it. And then maybe also see, how's it working? Are we getting that? Am I getting a return on that effort? Simply notice the breathing as it is, and whatever else might be coming up around it. Thinking about it, felt sense around it. Breathe and listen. Now, in the process of making space for things to arise, things will typically arise, especially if we have a lot of things that we've been not allowing to arise for some time, right? They see they finally get a chance, and oh boy, here they come. Usually that's going to take the form of some kind of thinking. We'll have time for that. We don't have to spin off into that thinking right now. Right now, it's just about the breathing. So when the thoughts come up, and they do, and we forget the breathing for a little bit, and we will, Me too. We all do. We notice that that's happened, and we come back. If we find ourselves hanging on to this thought of, oh, I fell off the breath and I fell into thinking, I'm terrible, and I'm never going to be able to do it. Well, that's a thought too. And we're holding on to this concept of what we think we have to be, in order to be, doing it right, be successful, right? Well, guess what? Doing it right and being successful right now is simply noticing that process and coming back. Can we let the breathing be? And if not, can we let our inability to let the breathing be? If you like, you may begin to move this into bodily sensation. Either the entire body, or you may pick one particular body part. Perhaps there's an area that is experiencing discomfort right now. Perhaps pain. Maybe a pleasant sense, maybe a neutral sense. Whether it's the whole body or a particular body part, or maybe a few different ones. Can we notice the sensations as the process that they are? What happens when we shine the light of attention on them? How does that change them, if at all? What happens when we bring sustained attention? It doesn't have to be some incredible forced concentration, just a gentle attention, but sustained. We just watch, just listen. and we breathe. What arises, if anything? Can we let that area be and simply see what plays out when we don't interfere? Now, you can continue working either just with the breathing or physical felt sense. If you are working with something right now, if you're dealing with something right now, with some kind of rumination, some kind of recurrent thinking, storylines, like some of the ones I was talking about earlier, I'd like to go through a short exercise that I've found helpful before. I invite you to have a conversation in your mind with this thing, this concept, this storyline, this thing you can't seem to let go of. We're going to have a conversation with it, but there's a rule. The rule is you may only ask questions. There's no arguing. There's no cross-examination. There's no lobbying. You can only ask questions. And I'm going to offer some of the ones that I have found helpful. You may get answers to these in the form of language, in the form of maybe visual symbols, maybe a felt sense in the body. You may get nothing. Focus on the breathing, make some space, and we can ask, what are you feeling? You, this thing that I'm seeing as something I can't release. We want to know. What are you feeling? we might ask this line of thinking that we can't seem to get rid of, what would you like me to know? What would you like me to know? We might ask this thing that we can't seem to let go of. What do you need? What do you need? An especially compassionate question that we might ask this thing that we cannot seem to let go of is, how can I help? How can I help? And the final question that I will offer, which, like all of the others, I invite you to spend some time with later on, after this session. We can ask this thing that we can't seem to let go of, who are you? Who are you? whatever you're working with, at whatever level. Let's take another minute to simply sit with it as it is. Letting it be. And simply being open to the idea. That we can bring attention and let that be enough. And we can see what plays out when we don't interfere. Before we move into some Q&A, I'm going to post a few links into the chat. I have my website in there, mindfulness-and-bluejeans.com. These free sessions are supported by one-on-one sessions that I do with folks who are having issues with things going on in their lives that may be related to what we're talking about today, maybe something else entirely. Would like to work through those things in the framework that I'm describing here that has helped me and so many other people. If that's something that's of interest to you, you can contact me or book a session through there. I have my YouTube channel on there as well, where a lot of these sessions and some of my other ones are being posted on a regular basis. Feel free to go on there and subscribe to receive any updates as those new sessions are coming up. And also my Patreon page as well, for anyone who is interested in helping to contribute on a one-time or ongoing basis. A lot of the same sessions are up there. With all that said, I think we can move into some discussion, some Q&A. If you have anything that you'd like to ask, any experiences that you maybe have had just now or in general. Hi, Judy.
Hi, Ron. Nice to see you again.
Great to see you.
When you were going through the questions, I was sort of, I was doing that. I was participating in that. So now I can't remember what all the questions were, but could you, because I found it very helpful, could you just repeat what they were?
I'm going to paste these right in the chat for you.
Thank you very much.
Certainly. I anticipated that might be an issue. So, yet there they are there. What are you feeling? What would you like me to know? What do you need? How can I help, or what would help? And who are you? And of course, there are countless other ones you may come up with. And I'll mention a couple of interesting things that I've found around that. One thing is that in those times when I find myself receiving a lot of feedback and answers very quickly, it doesn't even become a matter of trying to think of what questions to ask, because the questions are naturally coming out of the responses I'm receiving. It really does become like a dialogue. The way I describe it sometimes is being like Oprah. Oprah is just legendary for being this incredible interviewer. Why? Because she listens. When she's interviewing somebody, there's nobody else in her world at that time. And her questions aren't just whatever she had written down. Her questions are coming from what the response is. So even though she's asking questions, it's still a dialogue in the sense that her questions are coming out of what the other person is saying. So I have found that when a lot of answers are coming to me very quickly, I don't even need to like look down at a little. What should I be asking? The questions that naturally come based on the responses I'm receiving. The other interesting thing that I've noticed is I find that I most often receive a lot of answers very quickly when I wake up in the middle of the night. And my logical assumption has simply been, well, at that point, our subconscious has been ruling the roost, right? I mean, it's dream time, and we don't have our intellect that we've been sharpening and honing all day getting in the way. So I have found at times when I wake up in the middle of the night and I'm like, oh, here's this thing that's come to mind. Let's open that dialogue. Holy crap. The wealth of information that just comes spewing forward is amazing. So that is something that I have found very helpful. And it's kind of handy in a way because a lot of these things we're talking about keep us up at night, right? We'll wake up in the middle of the night thinking about the damn thing, right? And it's like, okay, fine. Great time to work with it. Great time to engage in this technique because holy shit, the fountain of information that might come at you could be it's the fire hose, So, cheers.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Hi, Chloe.
I'm in a spot right now that's like a huge life transition. And a lot of it, I've been working through with meditation, and I'm sort of in this new place. I had been in a very empowered place, almost joyous, and of feeling the crash. So I was going into my body and trying to just notice what I felt. And, I found sadness and fear. I felt a little bit of tears. I noticed a frown and sort of envisioned myself in like this fetal position on the floor and asked like what's going on. And it was, I feel betrayed. So then I started to, look at the questions, what are you feeling? What's this thing I can't release? And it went to, I feel betrayed, and that went deeper into, I feel unlovable. And just went into the felt sense of that. Sounds like I'm like falling apart in your session. And I just kind of like, well, what's kind of led me there? And it had to do with a combination of being derided, mocked, and excluded. And that hit a place. And then, what would you like me to know? So it went into, you're a sucker, for believing stuff that like I knew was there, but tried to give the benefit of the doubt and have an open mind that maybe things aren't as I see them. And it went into, what do you need? And it was like, I need to learn to really trust my feelings, like my intuitive feelings. Like you didn't go with that and it led you amok. And what do I need? I need clear seeing and the strength to act on it. And I need to trust that, like, there are moments of clear seeing that I don't want to be clear seeing. So I find a way to, dress it up in prettier clothing. So I kind of see that, like, how can I help was just trust your felt sense. So I'm just kind of there. It needs more work, but that was like my first iteration.
Thank you for sharing that. I think what a lot of things jumped out at me, but I think what I want to hit on is particularly the part where you said, what do I need? Well, I need clear seeing. and this strength, right, to do things as you know would be more skillful. And the reason I want to call that out is because the process of that was the result of clear seeing and having the strength to do that. Correct me if I'm wrong. It almost felt like you were expressing it as there's like a lack, like I need that strength, as if you didn't have it. It may not be how you meant it, but that's how I received it.
Yeah.
But you're actually doing it now. You do have that strength, because if you didn't, you wouldn't have already gotten to what you have gotten to. One of the challenges in this practice, of course, is a lot of times it's this is going to get worse before it gets better affair. And what that means is progress doesn't always feel like progress, because we think progress should always feel good. Sometimes in this practice, again, we're going to get a little dirty. Progress doesn't always feel good. It will bring us to a place, ultimately, that feels a hell of a lot better, not just than where we are while it's not feeling good, but how we felt before, when we felt, better, but it was because we were, avoiding that thing and denying that thing and putting lipstick on that pig. And, like you were saying, dressing the shit up, right? I don't want to get too deep into it, but just one example that comes to mind that I offer in one of my pitfall sessions. Every so often I'll do a pitfall session where I'm like, okay, here are some of the traps in a mindfulness practice that come up again and again. And one of the traps we fall into is thinking that we are becoming a worse person simply because we are seeing the dark sides more clearly. A classic way of progress seeming like backwards momentum. In a twisted sort of way, I have come to find those moments rewarding, if you will. You see it again and again and again and again and again, and you start to realize, oh, wait a minute. This just might be a signpost that I'm on the right road. It feels a little shitty right now. It feels very uncertain. I'm not feeling like I'm on real solid ground right now. Well, guess why? Because you're having a spiritual shift. That's progress. Does it feel great? No, it's scary as hell. Yeah, it will be sometimes. But it's a signpost on the road to progress. Does that help?
I'm really hoping.
In my experience, I have a 100% success rate of what I just described. It's never turned out to be different.
Just allow whatever feelings. Just allow.
There is ultimately more to it than just that at more advanced levels. But for starters, yeah. Which doesn't mean you can't take a break, okay? Because that's another trap that we sometimes fall into. There's this saying in spiritual circles that the only way out is through. And I like to amend that a little bit to say, yeah, the only way out usually is through, but you don't have to do it all at once. What my own teacher often phrases as don't make yourself sick getting healthy. So if you're starting to feel really overwhelmed by just sitting and being with some feelings in, under the guise of, well, I have to sit and be, I have to work through this. No, you can take a break, take some space and time away from it as needed. It's not a militant practice. So yeah, allow things to be, but sustainably.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Hiya, Jackie.
Oh, hi, Ron.
How you doing?
I'm trying to do this new way because I tend to ruminate a lot out of fear. And right now, I'm in a very low point. So lots of strong emotions, especially fear, that being excluded by a group that I have to go to every day. So lots of emotion, and including self-loathing, because some of the reason is because I sabotage myself. So with all this, generally I try to, how do I fix, how do I explain to people about the misunderstanding, about the assumption, or I try to people pleasing, even I've been doing that for so long. So I'm trying to do it differently. Like not intellectual, go to the felt sense, but I don't feel anything. Even I know it's so tough, but in my body, I don't feel anything. Like you were saying, which part, so what do? I don't feel.
It's a great question. Thank you for sharing that. I can definitely relate to that in that I'm extremely left-brained, very logical. Just I put things in mental boxes and organ logic. And fortunately for me, the teacher that I started seeing about at this point maybe 7 years ago, it's very funny. In some ways we are exactly the same, and in some ways we are complete and utter opposites. And one of the ways that we are opposites is that he is not left-brained like me. And he is much more into some of the things I've been describing today about felt sense and so forth. And I remember at one point early on when I was working with him, he said something to the effect of, have you tried practicing with the stuff below your jawline? You get a whole body there to work. Everything I do is particularly with the things that brought me to the practice, and very, very, very much up here. And this is very common in our society, even for folks maybe who aren't left-brained, because we are so intellectually driven. And most of us do ignore, to some extent, what's going on below the jawline. Sometimes until something happens that we are forced to no longer ignore what's going on below the jawline. So it's not uncommon for us to find that when we do open to what's there, and I congratulate you for doing so, because most people don't get that far. You have an openness, a willingness to say, what's here? What's going on down here? Give yourself credit for that. That is scary shit for most of us. When I said we may or may not receive answers today, and one of the things I said was if we do receive answers today, we may receive them in language. We may receive them in symbolic, visual sense. We may receive them in a bodily sense. We may, if we have not communicated with those parts of ourselves in a long enough period of time, we may not have a common language right now. Or we may have a common language, but those parts may not be ready to express yet. Very often, we simply do not trust those parts of ourselves. That was how I lived for almost a decade when my panic issues were happening and blossoming, and I was fighting them and avoiding them. And I didn't trust my own mind or body not to melt down and have an attack at any given moment. So when we do finally open up, it's not usually this, hey, we just throw our arms open and we're running across that proverbial meadow and we just hug. And no, I mean, there's not necessarily a two-way trust happening there. And that's why this process can take time. It took us a long time to build up these walls, and it can take a long time to pull them down as well. I would say to give it some time. To put it back in the karmic terms that I started with, everything the Buddha taught was, how do we alleviate our suffering? Well, how do we alleviate our suffering? We look at what we're doing, which you clearly have, the way you described it, you are. You have seen how that is working out for you and have seen, okay, this is causing suffering. You say, let's try something else. I'm going to form a new intention, and I'm going to do this, that, and the other thing, like this opening up, in line with that intention, and see, does this increase or decrease my suffering? You will get an answer, but we don't know when. And again, particularly for those things where we have spent a lot of time building things up and now we're going to try something new. Well, we've had maybe decades of momentum. Sometimes I talk about neuroplasticity, that the way that our brain literally at a physical level rewires itself based on our thought patterns. So if we've had a particular thought pattern for decades, and now we say, oh, holy shit, that is not working out for me, I need to try something new. Well, okay, but it's like paving a new road somewhere. There are these mental grooves that have been worn in for decades, and now we're like, no, I'm building an off-ramp over here. It doesn't just appear, does it? We have to build it. We have to work at it. That's this. I commend you for the work that you are doing, for the new intention that you have formed, and the new conditions that you are setting for better things to arise. Give them a little more time to do so. I hope that helps.
Thank you. So you mean at the meantime, I try to do the new way, but if I don't feel anything,
What I'm offering here, and you made a mention of that, I'm trying it your way and the new way. This is a way. What I share here, I share only from my own experience, which is all the Buddha did as well. It's all we can do. So I'm sharing, as he did, what I have found to work for me up until this point of my practice. Everyone's practice is their own. I offer you to take the best and leave the rest. Whatever you find that resonates, that works for you, take it, try it, work with it, modify it. If you find something that I've offered and you say, that thing sucks, don't do it. Don't do it. Maybe it doesn't work for you. Experiment. Take this, make it your own, and see what happens. And maybe find some other techniques and see what happens. The same way you are opening to your physical sense, open to different modes of practice and see what works. Only you will know what works for you. But give each one a good solid chance, too. It doesn't really help to just try one for a day and say, well, that didn't do it. Give them an honest chance. Because if we're trying something this new and unfamiliar, it's going to take a little time. So, yeah, work with what I've given you. Give it a chance. See how it feels. And modify accordingly. But again, give yourself some credit here. You have already gotten farther in your openness and your intention and your practice here than most people ever do. So I commend you for that. I hope that helps.
Thank you. It's very helpful.
Awesome.
Thank you very much.
Cheers. Thank you. Cheers. Yes, Lillian.
I really appreciate that you brought up trusting ourselves, because I don't know if other people feel this way, but that is something that I struggle with. I think that in thinking about the conversation earlier with life transitions, I've definitely gone through that. And I feel that my life is much more high stakes than it's ever been. And there's lots of choices that I know I'm going to need to make. And it also feels like with the real world, there's, you can't just always sit on them and let them naturally happen the way that you want them to. So I think when it came to the point of asking ourselves like what we need, asking that voice, I had a really hard time with that because, and at least in my experience, I made some big decisions, and I've been questioning for the past few months whether it was the right one. So I'm finding it hard to trust myself when I ask myself, what do I need? Because I'm like, well, do I really know anymore what's best for me? So I don't know if that resonates for other people, but that's something that came up for me during that exercise.
That's awesome. Thank you for sharing that. I smile because my very first teacher, and some of you have heard this before, it's one of my favorites. My first teacher, of course, was the psychologist who got me started back in the day. And since that time, I've gone to see him give talks at various places. And something that he said once that has always stuck with me. At one of these gatherings, this was at Cambridge Insight Meditation Center, good Lord, at this point, probably more than 15 years ago, done a talk on some topic, and then there was a Q&A at the end, and it was actually funny, come to think of it, the question that this gentleman asked happened around lines of rumination and repetitive thinking and something he couldn't let go of and so forth. And my teacher brought him through a somewhat similar thing to what I did today, where he said, all right, let's break down this process of thinking. What happens first and what happens next and what happens next, and kind of went through this whole thing. And then he started drilling in between the spaces in the chain. And he got to a point where he says, okay, so we've drilled down to this spot right here in the chain. He's like, so we've got this piece and we've got this piece, but there's something in between there. What's in between those two pieces? And the guy stopped and thought for a second. He says, I don't know. And my teacher said, stay there. Stay in the don't know. Or as another one of these classic parables goes, the monk goes to the master and says, Master, I'm so confused. And the master says, wonderful. The monk says, what's so wonderful? I just told you I'm confused. The master says, no better way to arrive at clear seeing than through confusion. I think one of the traps that we fall into is we don't like that state of confusion, or feeling like we don't necessarily know what's right for us at a given time. And so, again, we intellectualize and try to decide. Well, it's got to be that I have to know. If I don't know what's right for me, I don't know what to do. And that kind of forcing, it doesn't really work. We don't always know until later whether what we did was, whether that's going to turn out to have been the right thing or not. What we're talking about here is, with the whole topic of letting go, it's another way of talking about attachment, what's classically called attachment in Buddhism. And where we get into trouble is when we are attached to outcomes, which, as you alluded to, we don't have control over the outcomes because they're part of a whole world full of causes and conditions and effects and people. Once it's out there, good luck. I mean, who the hell knows what's going to happen? Where we skillfully apply our focus is to, again, our intention and the actions that we take that are informed by those intentions, and then how we update our intentions and our actions and so forth based on what we receive back. That's about as far as we can go. We can plant the seeds, we can put them under the sun, we can water the seeds, we can't make the friggin' plant grow. We can't force it. We have to step back at some point and see what we get, and based on what happens, do what we do next. And our lizard brain doesn't like that. Lizard brain does not like that because it's uncomfortable. And that's where this issue of trust really comes to the fore, doesn't it? Because if things are uncertain, if things are uncomfortable, then, well, no, I can't trust I'm going to be okay. At some point, what I've found is we have to learn where it is skillful to place our trust. What can we skillfully trust? Can we skillfully trust everything's going to work as we want it to? No. What can we skillfully trust? Well, we can work towards skillfully trusting our own intention. We can skillfully trust that if we find that we did something with the best of intentions and it went sideways anyway, that we will take that information and it will inform our future intention, our new current intention. The last thing I'll say is this, because we're about to run over, but to make it even a little more concrete and to relate it to something that is central to our practice, which is the breathing. As I mentioned earlier, I did not trust my own mind or body not to sell me out for almost 10 years. And one of the things that I did was diligently, hyper-vigilantly control my breathing. Because to me, the very first sign that I was starting to have a panic attack was the breathing started to speed up and get out of control. I was like, all right, I need to make sure that never happens. So when I started this practice, well, among the first things I was taught was, let's just sit and watch the breathing, not controlling it. And I'm like, holy fuck, are you serious? Like, no. And it was horrifying, but I did start to loosen my grip on the breathing. And I remember one of the things I started to feel at a physical sense was right in the solar plexus, right in that frickin' spot. I would feel this pulsation. And it scared the piss out of me because this is when I was just constantly freaking out. And I'm just like, okay, what is this? But I managed to stick with it. And at some point, I realized, okay, I'm letting the breathing just kind of happen and feeling around, just like, I'm still here. I'm getting enough air. I'm not dead. I'm not having a panic attack. And slowly started, again, like I said earlier, where you start to take the difficulty as a signpost, you're on the right road. I started to recognize that pulsation that I would feel, which started off as this really scary thing, started to notice, oh, you know what? The only time I feel this is when I'm sitting and allowing the breath to be as it is, which means I'm doing it right. So this uncomfortable, scary sensation is actually a signpost that I'm letting things be and unfold. And this thing that started off as something that was absolutely not to be trusted became a guidepost. Something I could trust. And saying, oh, you're on the right road. And eventually that dissipated. It just went away after about a month or so. Where are we placing our trust? I hope that helps. Thank you for sharing that. I do see a hand. I'll take one more. We are a little bit over if folks need to go. I understand, but we do have one more hand, and I'll let, hi, Laura.
Thank you for sharing, everybody. It's my first time joining, welcome. And I really appreciate it, and I look forward to continuing, learning more from everybody.
Awesome.
But what just came up for me is when you said the pulsing. I've actually been going to the doctors because when I lay down at night, and sometimes it's both sides, but mainly it's consistently going to bed. When I go to bed, I lay on my left side. I don't know if it was like breast cancer or something. It's very close to the, wall of my, chest. And it's pulsing every night. It pulses nonstop. and kind of even like a little bit like fluttery. And I'm going through a lot of transitions right now, and I'm actually living in a very uncomfortable, I mean, it's not that uncomfortable, but it is for me and my dog. I'm on the third floor, and, you know, we have to sort of tiptoe around. And it's not such a friendly neighborhood where I live, you know, community wise. And I'm very isolated. I am making changes, and I'm moving back to my community in Rhode Island, there in February. But I'm wondering if it's stress that's bringing that on.
I will preface this by saying I will
a doctor.
Yeah, I will speak from my experience, but I may also end up speaking a little bit out my ass. So
okay, appreciate that.
Yeah, I have had some experiences similar to that during extremely stressful times where I've had some profound physiological things happen that at the precise moment, that literally the frickin' moment that the stressful event ended, so did the physical symptoms. Very briefly, I was doing a thesis defense in college. Leading up to, I mean, I was freaking out for months about the thing. This was before I had even started my practice and had ways to really work with my anxiety. This was during my panic days. So like I needed extra things to panic about. For the last couple of weeks, I started to feel like this sort of, it was almost like like tree branches, like stabbing, like growing up, like a tree was growing up from my stomach. And I was starting to feel all of this, like, almost like, you know, lightning sort of, you know, shit going through. And it just kind of kept crawling up and up and up. And I remember the morning of the thesis defense, it had finally gotten high enough. It was in my chin. Oh. And I was like, holy shit. And I assumed it was the stress. You know, if it had continued past that day, I'd have gone to the doctor. I was like, oh, okay, I'm dying, you know. It was all the way up into my chin that morning. And I went and did my thesis defense, sat back down, and it was all completely gone. This was 1995. It hasn't happened since. I've read all kinds of things about stories about, there's a book out there, I can't remember the name of it offhand, but I'm sure there are many, but about people having physical symptoms that end up not just being tied to a particular stressful event, but the place in the body where it happens is symbolic of. You know, so, you know, the first thing that jumped out at me, and here's where I'm going to start talking out my ass. The first thing that jumped out to me is, you said it's on the left side. Right.
It is, and it was a little bit on the right as well,
okay.
But it consistently is on the left.
So the first thing, obviously, you're going to think of is, oh, the heart.
Yeah.
You know, so this is where in books like that, you might read a passage about, oh, and you were going through something that a heartbreak, or, and that kind of, and again, now I'm really starting to get outside I don't deal with this stuff. So I don't want to say too much about it. It's something that if you wanted to explore, again, I don't remember the name of the book, but the author is Caroline Myss, M-Y-S-S. It's something that, in fact, my own teacher, who's a little more into this stuff, had turned me on to. And if you can't find it, just shoot me a message. You got my link in there. So shoot me a message after this, and I'm happy to send you a link to it. I'll dig it up. You might find it interesting. Certainly, obviously, get the stuff checked out, which you said, you know, you're doing, obviously. But yeah, there's some interesting stuff around that again, I'm not an expert at, but you might find it interesting to look into and to see, oh, maybe this will clear up after the changes have settled and so forth. But in the meantime, yeah, listen to it. Listen to it. See what's going on there. Because it may very well be a physical manifestation of something driven from emotion. And you just might learn something.
So go through the questions that I did right there.
Try it. Sure.
Well, good. That's, it's very helpful.
Wait, I think Anatomy of the Spirit. I think that's the name of the book. I think that Anatomy of the Spirit. Judy's nodding. Do I have it right? Is that, you know, the book? Okay. Okay. That's it. Caroline Myss, Anatomy of the Spirit. Yeah. You might find that interesting. Yeah. That's the one.
Oh, I will get that book.
Yeah. Awesome.
Great.
Cheers.
Yeah. So, yeah.
Hey, thank you for that.
Thanks. So but being that I am doing a lot to get to the other side of it, and I'm, the processing of the divorce. It's been over a year now. Just that we haven't lived together, so it's and that was a stress scenario.
So there you go. Divorce, heart stuff. Yeah, that would align. That would align. Yeah. And like I say, it's not stuff I do find it interesting. It's one of those things that for me, like I say, I'm very left-brained, very intellectual. So for me, it's always one of those, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, those kinds of things. So it's something I find interesting, but I don't necessarily buy, although I need to see more. But that's awesome. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, thank you.
I will wrap it up there. We're a little ways over. Great stuff today. Thank you all so much. You've got my information in the chat there if you'd like to reach out. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ron.
Safe and happy holidays.
Thank you.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you.
Best holidays, everyone. Happy New Year. Thanks, Ron. Thanks, Laura. Thanks, Chloe. Thanks, Jackie.
Thank you
everyone
all.
Be well.
Cheers, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Take care.
Take care. Bye now.